We are back with a vengeance. You're listening to the Mighty Finland podcast, the leading podcast on all things military in Finland. And this time we're going to talk about NATO and how we're about to join that alliance and give our international listeners and followers an inside view into what that and also what's been going on over the past few months in Finland looks like from our point of view. And to drive home that idea of interoperability coming with NATO now, we're doing this in English because why not? The thing is, we pride ourselves, us hosts, we pride ourselves in that we don't know everything, so we need to have more knowledgeable people in the studio with us. This time, our guest is Charly Salonius-Pasternak, leading researcher, let me see if I can get this straight, leading researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and much like us, a Finnish reservist.
That's right. And like the Finnish reserve military, everyone has a job. So this will be a conversation, right?
Absolutely. And so that you know a bit more about who are talking here, my name is Ville, and with me here I have my battle buddy, also Ville.
That's me.
So we have the same name and actually also an identical service history. We did our mandatory military service as a part of what was then known as the Finnish Rapid Deployment Force, and we also did one tour to the Middle East, both of us. Nowadays, we're just active reservists and hosts of this podcast, and in addition to that, you should also check out our Instagram at Mighty Finland.
Yep, there's an underscore there somewhere.
Yeah, but, you'll find us at Mighty Finland. And so, without further ado, let's go to today's agenda.
This podcast is produced together with Savox, Varusteleka, and Savotta. We trust their gear, and so should you. All right, Charly, in terms of national security, what changed in Finland on February 24th this year?
Well, it's interesting because on the one hand, everything and nothing. Everything in the sense that finally everyone who had not realized what kind of a country Russia has become in terms of its willingness to use force, both conventional, threatened nuclear force, as the president said, the masks came off for everyone. On the other hand, as a researcher, I can say it's been, of course, obvious for a while. Georgia 2008, Russia's initial operation, illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, after which I have to say Finland, of course, increased its cooperation with Sweden bilaterally, further deepened it with the US, with NATO. So a lot of the things that we see now that leads up to the last month's events here, they probably were started really in 2014. So on the one hand, everything changed, but on the other hand, we've been seeing the trends for a while now.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you're bringing up here with everything changing, but at the same time, nothing changing, because this is literally what Finland has been preparing for the last 80 years or so, I would say.
I mean, the Finnish general staff has spent the last century thinking about one problem, which is how to defend this country of like 5 million against a country of 130, 140 million. So, in that way, our focus hasn't changed.
And I think that's an interesting, when you look at what happened on February 24th and the following days, it's exactly what we've trained for in our military service. With one exception that it's the scenario we've trained for was not to downplay anything that's happened in Ukraine, of course, but that scenario that we've trained for was a lot stronger in Russia and a lot
more capable.
Yeah.
Well, and one that actually followed its doctrine, which Russia didn't do in the beginning. I mean, you look at even the public interviews of Finnish officers on TV, elsewhere in the media, and they were baffled. What is this? They're not even following their doctrine, and this is a country that's known for following its doctrine. You know, they've since kind of readjusted, but I would have to say that I guess the old adage of train harder than the game. Now we're kind of seeing that. I'm glad that for all of us, different eras, but the training was against a very hard, very joint, very advanced adversary.
Yeah, it was weird to follow that first things unfolding, where you could kind of follow that this is exactly what we've been training for. A lot of armored units going into going in fast, kind of, and then
Going
you have
in
those,
deep,
going in deep, and then you have the air assault units, and then at the same time you're kind of going, but it's kind of not what we've been training for.
I mean, if a Finnish conscript tank driver, even after a few months, drove that close to the tank in front of them, they'd get yelled at.
Exactly.
I've heard more than a few who are looking at these videos from especially the beginning, and they're like, "What are these people doing?"
Yeah.
It's that has been a little bit of a surprise. Again, not to downplay the Ukrainians' bravery, but it probably did help the Ukrainians that the Russians didn't follow their doctrine and weren't quite as effective as we had thought in the beginning.
Yeah, especially if you think about it, like the legend and the history that we kind of have to live up to is that being able to defend our country. And the way it started in Winter War was, Stalin sending his troops thinking they can just march into this country. Now that's that one reality. And then that one reality we had was this, what we call Yellow A2, this that we just described.
The adversary.
Yeah, the adversary that's really capable in all domains. And then, instead of being this, it's kind of this historic figure that just kind of reappeared.
Yeah, there was like a couple of different types of disbelief in the first days. The first kind of disbelief was that, hold on a minute, there's actually a literal all-out war going on in Europe, which I didn't think was going to happen in my lifetime. But at the same time, there was also the type of disbelief that, is this really it, basically?
Well, and we're talking about did everything change or not? I think for a lot of Finns, while it was always obvious that the only existential military threat was Russia, then there are broader ones, climate change and all this, but the idea that there would be this broad war, as you said, and then a reminder of what it is when large-scale, mechanized, modern warfare takes on cities and civilians, as we've seen in Mariupol and Kharkiv and so on. This probably came as a shock, I think, to even a lot of Finns who, don't get paid or aren't, following this, thinking about this as their hobby. And that probably did explain part of the rhetoric of everything has changed. People realize that all the talk about kind of hybrid things, special forces, then there's this side of massive mechanized warfare and what it means. I think a lot of Finns even woke up to those videos and pictures.
Yep. And to go back to that, like geopolitical place, it's that idea that we were shocked and surprised, while of course we all know where we're kind of on that map. So it wasn't that much of a surprise, but we were still surprised. And I think that created, at least for me, real disbelief.
I mean, looking at Ukraine is landmass-wise much bigger than Finland, and Finland's a relatively large country in Europe, much bigger population, 44, 45 million versus a little over 5 million in Finland. And the thinking of, okay, if Russia is crazy enough to do this against Ukraine, as brother folk, then why wouldn't they in the future be ready to do it against Finland?
Yeah, precisely.
And that clearly, looking at the opinion polls, looking at what politicians have said, that clearly did shock a lot of people.
Yep.
Yeah, well, we can clearly see that in how people are reacting now here, or how they are, what's the word I'm searching for, suhtautua.
Well, how they view Russia?
Yeah,
or
how they view our like NATO membership.
Yeah,
They've been neutral for very long, and there's not been there's always been an active discussion around joining NATO, but it's never really been that big of a it hasn't really been viewed as a reality. Reality.
Joining EU 95, but then since the late 1990s. Every year, there's lots of polls about should we join NATO or not. And almost without fail, since the late 90s until, about 6 months ago, 60 to 70% of Finns were against NATO membership, and 20 to 30% were for it. So in a democracy, there was no politics of trying to push Finland into NATO for any party, basically. The population didn't want it.
There was no actual reason for it, except, you realized where we were.
Well, I mean, and here you have to say, lots of people talk about 2014 being a kind of some sort of a break there. After that, of course, there was the whole kind of political story that the political leadership here would talk about. We have our robust defense. We are increasing cooperation with Finland, Sweden, the U.S., NATO, and we have a functioning relationship with Russia. That this combination and our general rules-based order in the world would be enough of a deterrence. And then what happened was no trust in Russia, relationship with Russia basically gone. I mean, the border guards communicate daily kind of on just very practical matters, but otherwise gone. Rules-based order, not really there.
Not so much.
And a realization that you can cooperate a lot, but Ukraine cooperated a lot with NATO and others. And yes, they've been getting weapons, but really not that much else sanctioned against Russia. And so that, I think Finns said, okay, these things that were supposed to like together protect us, we're noticing that in an actual war against Russia, they don't necessarily protect as much. And they definitely probably don't create a deterrence, which is where NATO comes in.
Speaking of, there's two questions that I want one of you to answer, especially Charlie, for this part. Can you kind of explain to our listeners this whole Finland is militarily non-aligned, neutral? What has the situation been and what the change is now?
Sure. I've been asked, probably 100 times in different interviews about this. So during the Cold War, Finland was neutral, but it was viewed as a tool by most. And by that, I mean that if Finland can convince the Soviet leadership that it was neutral, it then had enough leeway in foreign policy to do more economic cooperation with the West, European free trade agreements, and so on. Then, definitely 1995, Finland's neutrality in any form ends with EU membership. The formal line to this day is Finland does not belong to a military alliance. The reason for that is NATO is viewed as a military or defense alliance, but the EU is a political alliance. It's an economic alliance in many ways. And of course, the EU agreements also include a military component. So that's why the Finnish government officially, obviously not neutral, but also not military non-aligned. Finland is very militarily aligned. I mean, you can just look at US and Finland, where Finland has continuously been able to buy kit that the US doesn't sell even to most of its allies. I mean, so this should tell you a lot about that bilateral relationship, but also the sense that Finland is definitely military aligned. And I am 100% certain that the Russian general staff has for a long time assumed Finland and Sweden, for that matter, what side they would fight on if there was a war.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Situational awareness is key. Savox Communications is your #1 partner in critical communications worldwide. Head to savox.com or to our bio. All right, that leads us to the way our national defense is then set up in this world where we're kind of allied and kind of not, and living where we are. Ville, do you want to try and start and explain a little bit of how our system is set up?
Oh boy. Well, as we mentioned at the beginning, we're all reservists, and so are most of the men between the ages of 18 to 60.
Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So
one third of the adult population is military training.
Yeah, precisely. So that tells already, or should at least tell a lot about how we're organized. So our total reserves are roughly 900,000 troops strong. Yeah, men and women. So that's almost a fifth of our population.
So that's essentially the number that's been trained in the arts of being a soldier.
Yeah.
And the field army is about 280,000.
Yeah.
Then out of that 900,000, there's about 100,000 that are so-called VOP. They are relieved of military duty because their job in society is critical to society standing up. So if you're a mobile network service guy or gal, then it's much better for Finnish society and the military that the mobile networks work rather than, dragging a machine gun somewhere in the forest.
Not to take away from anybody who's dragging a machine gun in the forest.
No, not at all. But for Finland's perspective,
Yeah.
it's useful to look at whether or not an individual's current job, and this of course changes. Then if you switch jobs, then you go back to a unit or something like that. But there's definitely a comprehensive view of what it is to be a reservist and where you're most useful.
So essentially in Finland, when you turn 18, you get a letter. If you're a guy, it may change in the future. If you're a guy or a gal or anything between or outside of those, you turn 18, you get a letter saying, "Oh boy, you've been drafted."
It's about to go down.
Yeah. They assign you to a place. You can decide on between military and civil service, but what would be the percentage between those? Maybe how many go into military service?
75% start. Of course, if you have different physical injuries or psychological or whatever, no. So 75% start, and then the completion percentage is around 70. People get injured or something changes in life, and then they might continue later or so. So there's a small drop off there, definitely. And then, of course, volunteer women since 1995, 6. Yeah. And that's about an average of 1,000 a year nowadays.
Yeah.
And there's been talks about having women kind of being drafted as well, or come to the
like going through the first phase of recruitment.
Yeah. You can also do a civil service. So the military service lasts 6 to 12 months, or 6, 9, or 12 months. You can do civil service. That'll be 12 months, I think. And then you can also go to jail if you want to.
Yeah, and that's also 12 months.
Yeah. And we actually talked about this in our other English episode. So we usually do this in Finnish, but this time did this in English. But we did an episode last year with Bo, a U.S. Army service member, a Green Beret captain, and there we talked with him about this stuff. So if you want to listen more about that, you can listen through that. But that's so you go through
the gist of it.
Yeah, you go through. Then you between high school and college usually, or whatever you end up doing after high school, you do usually a year in the military where you're trained to do whatever.
And just to clarify, because some people confuse this, when you're a conscript, you're not part of the kind of force that's envisioned for defense.
Yeah.
Because you're in training. At the very, very tail end, once you've learned not just basic military skills, but how to work in a fairly large unit, at that point, you could in extremis be used. But the idea is that, in fact, the field army is reservists.
Yeah.
Because the conscripts are in training, and it would be, morally and many other ways problematic of using people still in training.
Yeah, who would do that?
Who would do that? Also, not tell them where they're going.
Yeah.
But also to drive home that point of things change, a little bit of that has changed after 2014 with the what you call them,
so
readiness units.
Readiness units. And here I have to say, having researched a fair number of countries, different militaries. So the readiness units were created because there was a realization that on a daily basis, since the military or defense forces had, after the Cold War, moved into mainly a training organization, the Air Force and Navy had good readiness on an hourly basis. The land forces or Army didn't. And there was a realization that if there was a small, airborne landing or something like that, Finland didn't have fully trained units that had trained together well and had different kind of organic support and things. Right now, these units, I bet, with the very, very few exceptions in Europe, are the fastest out of the gate. I mean, from when the warning is given to when they're rolling out the gate, the exact time is a secret and depends a little bit, of course, on the time of the day. But if let's put it this way, if you have a long lunch, that's about the time it takes for them to roll out. And this isn't just a few people in tanks or armored personnel carriers. This is artillery, logistics, ISR. So yeah, it's fairly impressive that they built up this capability quickly. And of course, thinking about the fact that we're defending and we know the territory, this has changed the adversary's calculus significantly, because the amount of force they would have to bring to bear in an airborne landing is very different than if there were just a few random SOF guys meeting them.
Yeah, because essentially before that, it was only SOF who had that to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think on top of that, there's that idea of between when wars in the Middle East started and I don't know, 2014 or even to this day, when a lot of militaries around Europe were going towards these crisis management operations.
Yeah, counterinsurgency,
yeah, exactly.
counter-terror stuff, yeah.
And we're moving towards high speed, low drag kind of things.
Yeah, there was definitely a shift of focus.
Oh yeah,
more of the, yeah.
A lot of that did not happen in Finland. Now, we were a part of ISAF in Afghanistan and all that. But the majority, it's always about
national defense,
and even, buying more tanks. That happened in, what was it, 2015?
and a presumption that the adversary has, at least much of the time, air superiority. The adversary has really good electronic warfare capabilities. Now, of course, what we're seeing in Ukraine is, as we were talking about earlier, maybe they're not always so great, but this is also a difference. And we saw it in referencing this time, probably 2015 to 18, it was clearest when NATO member all volunteer force units would come. They were excellent, I'm sure, in the Middle East or Afghanistan. But then when they came and their adversaries were well-trained, armored units with a lot of anti-tank weapons, they got into some trouble, which was, of course, good for the Finns to then show that, hey, we have something to teach you. The reservists may not have combat experience, but we also have something to teach you. And I think this made the cooperation immediately kind of go both ways, rather than a sense of the combat experience are coming to teach something to the Finns.
You need gear? We got some at Varustelleka.
So, as of today, we are very much about to join NATO. We have submitted our application, if we can say it like that.
Yeah.
And the question is, what does Finland and Sweden have to offer NATO? Because Sweden is also in the bandwagon.
Sure. I group them into a few different things. One is just pure geography. I'll deal with that first quickly. Finland and Sweden, because of geography, will make it easier for the current existing members to defend other existing members, to uphold the collective defense promises, just based on geography. This was clear from 2014 on, when NATO started thinking about, we actually need to defend all of our members. Then they looked at the map, did some military exercise, and they were like, shit, we need the Finns and the Swedes, at least their territory. So that's just a nice bonus right there. But then in terms of military capability, and there are a few big differences between this group of potential new NATO members, Finland and Sweden, and some of the previous rounds. One is, of course, Finland and Sweden are EU members, democracies. There's no question about civilian military control, all of this stuff. But there are serious military capabilities. I'd have to say Finland probably brings a little bit more to bear, because Sweden did go down this path of it's all about expeditionary counterinsurgency international operations. But Sweden does have probably the best submarines for this region, hands down. Strong Air Force.
Signals intelligence.
Signals intelligence is world class. Too small, but good Navy, built for this area. If you move to Finland's Navy, same way. It's relatively small, but it's built for this area. The new class of ship that the Finnish Navy will have is effectively a pocket frigate. I mean, I'm surprised there's any space for food, because it's loaded with so many different U.S., Israeli, and other weapons. So that's the Navy. The Air Force has around 60 F-18 Hornets bought or delivered between 1995 and 2000. And the Finnish Air Force, of course, for all but the last few years, focused on air-to-air combat. which is also one of the reasons that, for instance, the Finnish Air Force and U.S. Marines, besides flying the same plane, have an exchange, because both realized, okay, the Marines are very good at air-to-ground. I'll get to that soon, but have practiced less air-to-air, and the Finns go the other way. So there's been a lot of learning in the last few years. The air-to-ground mission, one of the reasons I've argued that the Finnish Air Force right now, the Norwegians are starting to fly the F-35, so it'll change, but right now are probably the most robust Air Force in Northern Europe, including the Germans, only because the Germans probably can't fly as many planes at the same time as we can. But it's kind of keeping the planes modern and a long-range strike capability. So about a decade back, the U.S. sold its, at the time, most advanced air-to-ground system, JASSM, effectively a cruise missile, to Finland, before any NATO ally was allowed to buy it. Again, that says something about the relationship. So that's Air Force, Navy. Then we get to the land forces. You guys know this.
Yeah.
Biggest artillery park in Europe, 280,000 field army, and having seen the two of you in the forests, extremely well trained and kitted out, right?
Right.
For sure. At least kitted out.
I think that's an important thing to mention. Even though we're a reservist army, it's the emphasis has always been on training as well, knowing what to do, and not just have people run around with weapons.
Yeah.
And if there was what we kind of saw in Kiev, kind of just handing out weapons and then starting to teach them how to use it, how to be a soldier, it would be very different. It probably wouldn't go to that, because you would be kitted out somewhere in the forest.
I mean, the thing, so it doesn't sound like just like a bunch of fanboys. I have to say, of course, reservists should have more training in Finland. It is obvious for years. Yeah. The main issue has been one of volume. So you have to continue training conscripts, and at the same time, you should increase training of reservists. And in Finland, the idea isn't that the reservists necessarily train each other. It's that there's a whole training. There isn't a training command, but you have trainers. And so there's just been a few bottlenecks. So definitely more training there. And of course, if we're being honest, does every reservist get the coolest, sexiest kit? No.
I mean, if I don't get a high cut helmet, and
you have your own.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Very, very true.
Yeah. So I think just on a pure military side, both contribute. And we haven't even touched on Intel, which combines Finland's and Sweden's geography and experience in continuing to follow Russia effectively. That's what Finnish military intelligence does. Yeah, they pay a little bit attention to other things in the world, but it's Russia, Russia, Russia.
Yeah.
And then finally, I'll say the third thing after this long sojourn into what we can deliver is, with Finland and Sweden as members, you can literally, or you should, replan all of Northern Europe's defense, not just Baltic Sea region or Scandinavia or Nordics, all of Northern Europe's. Because with Finland and Sweden as members, what you do with the NATO, with Poland, Germany, can actually change. So it makes it much easier to develop a genuinely logical, modern defense plan that takes into consideration all the changes in technology that we've all seen in the last decades.
Oh, quickly, you mentioned the Marines there, and I was following up. I went to that exercise Cold Response about two months ago, and
in northern
Norway, big NATO exercise with a lot of, I think it was like almost 30 countries and tens of thousands of soldiers there, and Finland. It was essentially the scenario was Finland, Sweden, and Norway were kind of defending, and everybody else was attacking, including also the Norwegians. And I'll just say that these high readiness units, they stopped the Marines.
We leave it at that. It's it's apparently a sore point.
Yeah, exactly.
For someone.
Yeah, exactly. Drop the mic there.
Yeah, I could just circle back for a second to us speaking about the conscription service here, because it is 6, 9, or 11 months, I think, or 11 to 12 months. Yeah, but so that is for anybody who's been in the military for any while, anywhere, basically. That sounds like a very short time to get anything done. But as we have done this since forever, basically.
Essentially.
It's become quite an effective system. So like
it's geared towards training people.
Yeah.
There's
You have very little
around.
downtime. Yeah, very little downtime.
Absolutely, and it's been improved in the last few years by this, called Training 2020 system, where what is otherwise you might think of military as conservative, they actually combined a lot of different kind of perspectives on how do you train, pedagogical, psychological, sociological. How do young people learn? Well, doesn't surprise anyone that short videos are a fairly good way of getting things across. So they created a whole bunch of short videos so that before you actually have training on anything, laying mines, cleaning your rifle, whatever it is, you can watch a video. So you've already seen this being done. And it also made sure the training is similar everywhere because everyone's watched these videos. There's an explanation not just of what you're doing, but why you're doing it, which of course then helps in kind of inculcating this idea of mission command, which is also, I think, a big difference. It's talked about a lot, but in Finland, you frequently have people who are fairly young, again, compared to many other militaries, being given responsibilities which are fairly hefty. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, coming out of high school, before you go to college, to kind of do a detour into, the arts and crafts of the military.
Yeah.
It's a
go through NCO school or reserve officer school. And
learn tactical casualty combat care and all that. It's
or just artillery planning.
It's
done kind of at battalion level. There's maybe 1-2 cadre officers who might be involved in artillery. Everything else is reservists, from targeting to obviously just operations, firing, all of this. So that says something that it actually does work. And anyone who wants to see how this might work, skip to YouTube, go to Finnish Defense Forces, Puolustusvoimat YouTube channel, and look up, for instance, the Northern 17 video. That's with a very few exceptions on screen. It's all reservists.
Our partner Savotta makes amazing load-carrying equipment designed for extreme conditions. Check them out from the link in our bio. That actually brings me to that idea, or do we have it here later? No, about how our society is geared towards security as well. There's been a lot of media ramble around how underneath Helsinki, our capital city, there's
tunnels.
Bomb shelters. Yeah, I think it was very interesting and eye-opening when I think it was BBC who made a report from there, and they were quite confused about it. That here people are playing floorball, and in the next space here there's some more bomb shelters. Well, it's all bomb shelters, but was a weird contrast between civil society and preparing for war. But in Finnish society, there hasn't been this active preparation for war. It's more like just being a part of everyday life forever. It's
that's exactly it. I mean, we're kind of a funny nation of preppers in a way.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if something is of concern, then you just come up with a plan or a few plans usually, and you try to solve it. But once you've prepared, then you go on with your life normally.
Yeah.
You don't continuously worry about it. You try to fix or prepare for whatever, and then you go on. And the shelters are a part of it. And a key thing that I get asked a lot about this before is Finland preparing for World War III? And I said, well, no, that the whole idea is there could be any number of things that could cause your power to go out, water shortage or anything like that. It could be just a industrial accident, nuclear accident. It could be a fall storm.
Yeah.
And in extremis, it could be war. But for all of these things, you should probably have some food at home. If you live far away from everyone else in the woods, you should probably have a generator. It's preparations for stuff that could normally happen, and the war is just an extreme example of it.
And it's that idea of you're going to take care of yourself, and it's not just that shifting that responsibility to somebody else or another organization.
And maybe it also comes partly from the fact that half of the year the weather is trying to basically kill us.
I mean, I was just talking a few days ago to a huge group of international defense industry people who are on a trip here, and just pointing out the operational environment. That if your pitch is because of night vision goggles, we own the night. Well, if you're doing operations in northern Finland, there is no night for a chunk of the year. Like, the sun literally does not go down for months. On the other hand, if you're used to operating that will do something at daylight, also in Lapland, you have to train. How do you move a battalion or a brigade when the sun never rises?
Yeah, you got to own the day as well.
Yeah.
Or then it could be full-on snow, a meter of snow up in northern Finland, Lapland. So you're using snow scooters, skis, and in the south, you're doing scuba and, you're full on in kind of spring, summer mode. And if you're doing Navy ops here in a cold winter, the Baltic freezes. So there's a lot of things that you really have to think of and prepare here that you probably don't see in other places so much.
Absolutely. And still going a bit back to the prepper mentality and society being built around these kinds of national security things. Pretty common when you move into a new apartment building and you just go around and check out, okay, yeah, hey, there's the bomb shelter over there. Good to know. That's how you get in there. I caught myself doing this the last time, and I had done it all the previous times I had moved, and this time I was just like, yeah, actually, I think this is something that everybody doesn't do.
No.
Not everywhere. Or like in Finland, basically everybody knows where their closest bomb shelter is, but you move to your neighboring country, probably not even there people do this.
Now, that said, of course, there's been a huge bump in the last months because, we three are normal people, but we're interested in this.
Yeah.
Then there are people who probably thought, yeah, big war is somewhere there far out. Or I'm a reservist, but, it's unlikely I'll be needed because, for whatever reason. We all know that, one of the, the biggest, when the U.S. would be Army, Navy stores, but here kind of military supply surplus stores, Varusteleka. I mean, they sold out of their reservist stuff in weeks and a month right after Russia expanded the war in Ukraine. Because a lot of people were thinking, okay, well, it's moved a step closer. War may not come, this month or this year, but I should probably, go and see if there's anything I need to pick up, a med kit, which could also be useful, in everyday life. You go to the summer cabin, you use an axe and, hit yourself or someone else in the foot or whatever. Yeah. But you've seen this trend also. So there's definitely been a group of people that thought that's somewhere far there. And now, because of looking at Ukraine, they've done two things. One, changed their view on NATO membership. And two, been like, I should probably do a little bit more preparations than I had done before.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. Let's talk about the Nordics, because this is, I think, a really interesting combination of things. Because when you think about the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian countries, which apparently we're not a part of, we're just a Nordic country, according to strict rules. So how will Finland and Sweden's joining impact Nordic collaboration? And when you really think about it, because we're all the countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, maybe even Iceland.
Yeah, it doesn't have a military, but it does do stuff in NATO. So
yeah, exactly. And so now we're actually allied. Now we're actually, we've always thought about things the same way. There's that same mentality, the same approach to things. Now we're actually allied. What changes? What happens?
First, I'm going to say, yes, the same mentality. I mean, I'm being at ISAF HQ on a visit, and then there was, of course, a Nordic house there. And so there is this kind of historic and other connections. You do things largely the same way, broadly. What changes? Well, I mentioned the broad thing that you can redo Northern European defense. But then if we focus on the Nordics, if anyone looks at a map and looks at Northern Finland, Northern Sweden, Norway, you can see it's one operational area that happens to be spread over three countries. So cooperation there is, of course, going to be easier. Those are clear things. There's probably a whole host of training, education stuff, acquisitions will be in some ways easier. I mean, we do have a Nordic combat uniform coming. It's the same uniform, but all the countries decided to keep their own national camo for
pattern,
summer. Yeah. So there's stuff like that. And then down to individual elements where Finland decided last December to buy the F-35 after a genuine competition, but the F-35 was best. Norway is already flying it. When Finland and Sweden are members, Finland and Norway, and why not Denmark also, will be able to wring the most out of the F-35 because just as an intel collection platform, it is very nice. So there's a lot of things that can be done on the Nordic space that couldn't be done with Finland and Sweden not being part of NATO.
Do you think there's going to be some sort of joint base? Are we going to have like an enhanced forward presence kind of thing here?
I mean, in Finland, the thing that would make sense, and for this you have to understand that the Finnish political leadership, when they're talking about why is this necessary, said, well, we have a robust defense conventionally, but of course, allied contributions are good for increasing the conventional deterrence. We've seen in Ukraine how many missiles you need, and special forces are useful and all this. But then there's a completely kind of separate thing, which is the nuclear deterrence component, which Finland could never, ever do. So within this broader thing, what could Finland do? Well, it doesn't want, and no one's going to give it nukes or anything like that. Finland, some of the things we don't need is probably not lots of NATO members coming and bring their land forces. But what I expect that we'll get is a NFIU, so NATO Force Integration Unit, 20, 30 people that effectively make it easier for both exercises, but then also any reinforcements for deterrence or ultimately collective defense operations. So all the logistics, everyone knows each other, ensure that Finland also is connected to all of the NATO's networks. So that's what I could see easily being done. And then just an ongoing set of exercises, probably more even than now. Some of the national ones will see more NATO member participation, especially from countries that are close. I mean, Finland always contributes to Estonia's biggest national exercise, SIA. But I could see this kind of stuff, especially regionally, because it just makes sense. If you're going to fight together, then you might as well practice together. So that's what I foresee. Not some mega bases because they're militarily vulnerable. No one really wants to send them. And again, land forces is probably the one thing Finland doesn't immediately need help on.
Right.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just also adding to the fact that probably that would geopolitically do more harm than good.
I'm glad you are putting your research hat, because I definitely didn't. But yes, considering Russia's views, this is a nice way to kind of increase Finland's deterrence, but not purposefully poke the bear with something that doesn't militarily actually contribute to defense or deterrence.
Yeah, precisely.
When we're on the subject, actually, before you go into that next question, I saw you eyeing there already. What are we thinking about? Russia, they're not going to like this. They don't like this.
Well, this has, of course, been one of the worries for decades in polls of when Finns have been asked join or not is, no, Russia's reaction and things like this. And I know I myself have been a part of lots of people in Finland recently thinking about what could the reactions be. And of course, again, this prepper mentality, prepare for everything from individual information operations to an airborne landing somewhere, use of refugees as a weapon, cyber attacks, obviously. And all of these may come or they may not. We don't know. What we do know is this far on the political level, both President Putin, Foreign Minister Lavrov, they've all been like, it doesn't make really a difference, not a big deal. What we might care about is if there's some big NATO infrastructure or something. I suspect, obviously don't know, but that's code for aegis on shore or some sort of anti-ballistic capability. This NATO force integration unit, 20, 30 soldiers is not something Russia cares about. So what is this? I read it as already preemptively moving the goalpost a little bit so that Russia can then say, look, the Finns kind of got duped into NATO membership as if, a great majority of the population, the politicians didn't want this. But then they move the goalposts and are like, okay, you're members, no big deal. We could ignore this. We don't have to respond to this. But then we get the other day, the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry saying that the response was in the hands of the Russian military and it was going to be a special surprise. And now I'm, of course, hoping it's a special surprise, just as successful as the special operation we've seen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, precisely.
I mean, like we said, it was very surprising that they managed to destroy their own forces after years of preparation.
And so, I mean, again, not take it lightly, but I think, like dark humor has been flourishing, at least in my working communities in recent times, because it's a good way to deal with it. But we really don't know. It could just be quiet. We know the Russian model of deny everything, say you're not going to do something, and then boom, one day do something. So don't know. But can I quote something said on CNN?
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Because so there was this large mechanized exercise, Arrow 22. There were British tanks, U.S. armor, all sorts of stuff, senior officers and stuff. And CNN interviewed a Finnish soldier, and he was asked about this. And he first gives like a 30-second really good analysis of the geopolitical situation that, well, the Russian forces are stuck in Ukraine. There's all this. And then, and then he ends it with a nice mic drop of saying, but if they do come here, they would get their asses kicked.
Yeah.
So,
and this was a conscript
exactly.
in the later stages of his conscription service.
One person who would probably be in the front line. So I'm sure with his friends, they've talked about, again, this dark humor, though, they actually, if Russia decides to do something and that do something is militarily, then this guy, Inkinen, is going to be on the front line. So I think we can give him that if this is his feeling and confidence level, then that's okay.
And he's surely not the only one who feels that way.
No,
definitely not.
I can tell you that.
No.
And actually, sort of on that point, and I touched on this in the beginning, that idea in Finland is obviously first looking back at our history to the late 40s when we had to fight the Soviet Union. And so there's that idea of never let it happen again. Simultaneously,
you want to avoid war.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want war. Now, simultaneously, war may come to us regardless of what we want.
What we wish. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to be prepared.
You said it perfectly.
And then on top of that, I don't know, like on a deeply personal level, I don't know how you guys feel, but there's that legend of like this was fought on our ground. And our nation was defended. So, like, you really have to live up to that legend.
There's a chain. Yeah. There's a chain here. I mean, so I did my service before you guys, so late 90s, and I don't think any of us were genuinely thinking we might have to use these skills in a real situation in the coming years, because it was the 90s. Everything was looking good. There was like a chance that Russia might slowly develop into more of a European democracy or its own version, but it's definitely not what was now. But there was a clear realization that we're a chain of this history, that if you break this chain now, then 20 or 30 years forward in time, you don't have the capability you need if and when Russia again is strong. And I think that is something that I would argue that most Finns share, is even if they haven't served or they have no interest or they don't even think war is likely, they realize that there's still a need for Finland to have a defense capability.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, that has been one thing that has been used as an argument against joining NATO in the past, that if we do join, we kind of can put our hands up and trust our defense into the hands of NATO. And do you think this is a real risk? Or?
Well, I mean, there's actually kind of, okay, I'm a researcher, so I shouldn't, be this stupid about it in a way, but there's some proof that we just got the other day in the same poll, which has been done year on year on year. got historically high support for NATO and historically high will to defend of the Finns saying, and the question is, even if the outcome was uncertain, so in a way you could think Ukraine now, should Finland be militarily defended? So you get historically high results in both join NATO and defend Finland.
Yeah.
I think that says a lot.
Yeah.
Well
said.
I mean, as Finnish officials had said, and politicians listening to the debates in parliament, Finland will keep this robust defense capability we've talked about and modernize it. And then on top of that will be, when we're a NATO member, the collective defense families, conventional and nuclear deterrence. Because again, the point is not to have war, to have Russia never think we could succeed in our political aims by attacking Finland. And that's what we want.
And that's the perfect gap or bridge for the next question regarding the fifth article in NATO.
Varusteleka. We are the good guys.
The political climate in Finland. Do we perceive ourselves as the ones being assisted, or are we also prepared to offer aid?
It's interesting. Having looked at this discussion for almost 2 decades, quite often it's about what assistance could we get, and then we realize that we probably need to assist others. Then there's a understandable worry by some that is my son, daughter, husband, wife going to be sent somewhere? Now the government made it very clear in their most recent kind of paper that argued for NATO membership that in the constitution, there is a requirement for everyone to defend the country. This will not be expanded to include everyone in NATO. So Finland makes a solemn commitment to defending its allies, but it doesn't mean that every Finnish reservist or person now is responsible for defending the whole country. Looking at some other polls, I think, yes, it will take some time for Finns to, after maybe not even decades, but centuries of being like, we're going to be alone, to say, yes, of course we're going to help others. But I think it's obvious that that's how most Finns on a daily life feel. Of course you help someone who needs help on the street or anywhere else. It just will take, it'll be a cultural change to also think of it in terms of defense terms. But I think absolutely so. If I can just add one last thing, what I'm sometimes asked about is by Finns, they're like, well, what are we exactly going to have to send to Estonia or Norway or somewhere else? And they wanted is it going to be 2 companies or a battalion or something? I'm like, do you know how Uusimaa, the greater Helsinki region or some cities going to be defended? And they're like, no. I'm like, why would you have that insight into NATO's graduated response and defense plan, since you accept that you won't have it for Finland for obvious security reasons?
And I think on that political climate and our willingness to help, there's already evidence. If you look at Ukraine, a lot of people want to help. Obviously we're not involved in militarily, so
I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't think of other things where I've seen such collective feeling of wanting to help. Finns, collecting money, driving stuff to the Polish border in Ukraine. In terms of then fighters per capita, I understand that the Finns are, if not the biggest non-Ukrainian, nationality helping Ukraine's defense, but definitely one of the biggest ones. So I think all of these I don't know what your views are, but I feel like there's an outpour of support and concrete desire to help. Yeah,
I mean, if you were to compare Finland and Ukraine, between each other, you can kind of see, we feel you. We feel, what's going on there. We're both neighbors to Russia, militarily non-aligned, all this stuff. So
kind of being there, done that type of deal.
Winter war, I think society remembers collectively how it feels like when a large neighbor, then Soviet Union, now Russia, attacks you, and how everyone collectively joins.
Yep.
I for a long time was arguing that Finland should have already sold Ukraine weapons years ago, but now giving them. And now I feel like, most people have understood and accepted that, every weapon we give that allows the Ukrainians to destroy more Russian forces is a bonus for us.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
less tanks on our borders.
yeah, exactly. We know the units that are essentially on the not the Finnish border, per se,
Or
but
were.
yeah, exactly. With that, the units that were there that have now turned to scrap metal in the fields of Ukraine.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, we're not. I don't think we aren't happy at some Russian 18-year-old boy who's been misled dying.
Right.
But from a Finnish security point of view, there have probably never been this few Russian forces along the Finnish border outside of then maybe Kola Peninsula and nuclear weapons, but that's a separate story. But,
Yeah.
Helping Ukraine, you can argue as a Finn that you should do it for kind of moral reasons as well as just practical reasons.
Yeah, you bring up a great point there regarding not being happy about some 18-year-old misled Russian boy dying. I mean, they are our neighbors, and we have a lot of trade. We have a lot of tourism back and forth, or had.
I mean, before Corona, there were like 10 million visits every year.
Yeah, precisely. And they are a dear neighbor to us, or have been. And our grudge is definitely not against the Russian people. It's absolutely towards the government and Putin, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount. The people they're being fed propaganda, and they're.
And I mean, yes, there's of course a big country. There's many different views. Some chunk genuinely support this war, special operations. A lot don't. You can see what the situation is when someone goes and just holds up a copy of the book War and Peace as a protest, but they get carted off to jail. That didn't happen even during the Soviet Union and communist times. So you can only imagine, as a political scientist, looking at what if Russia had a set of leaders through the 90s until now that rather than focusing on enriching themselves and those near them, had the fortune, which I have to say, of Finns having had, of a host of leaders from different political directions saying, yes, I have my party interest, but first and foremost, I have Finland's security as my interest. But that's an alternative history. And as the Finnish prime minister said, it'll take at least a generation for trust to be rebuilt to whatever the future next regime is in Russia. So
right, because it was a very fragile trust that we had before. And I do like the way our president said, when the war began, he said, the masks are off and you can only see the bare face of war. And then later said that when asked about Russian, how they would retaliate or whatever about NATO,
react to us joining
NATO, that, look in the mirror, you caused this yourself. And I do like that the father-like
president of the people,
saying,
true leader.
Well, first you take the mask off, and then you look in the mirror, and then you realize you did this yourself.
Yeah,
and I can though then that not just Finland, a part of a expanded NATO, EU, all realized that if after this heroic effort at defending us and the ideas, Ukraine is made to feel at home in a European family, whatever it means in terms of literally being a member in the EU or NATO or something like that, but that this should probably be enough of a proof, even at this point, by the Ukrainians that, where they stand and which family they want to belong to and should belong to.
Absolutely.
So now I have to ask, just talking about the partial destruction of the Russian military at the moment, but as we also noted, Russia, like large regional powers, they can go down, they can come up. So it might not be this year's question or next year's, but we've now seen what the Russian military can do in terms of civilian damage, all of this. Let's say there isn't a regime change in Russia, and some years forward, we face a similar situation. The two of you are likely to be commanding people then, but somewhere in the front. What are your thoughts about this as you look at what's unfolded in terms of politically Finland's NATO debate, but then what we've seen in Ukraine and reflecting on, being reservists.
Yeah, being military-aged males.
Yeah.
to use that ROE term. Yeah, I mean, it's a terrifying question, but one big part of it, apart from being terrified of it or not wanting it to happen, is of course that's exactly what we've trained for. So.
And this time, hopefully, you won't be alone because there's
yeah, exactly. That's the first point, that we'll be a part of NATO. We'll be under that deterrence, that fifth article. Gladly, we welcome that because of this worst case scenario. Now, in terms of actually defending our country, I don't know. It's part of the deal.
Yeah, have to agree with that. Yeah,
right. I mean,
we did our, is it called vows, military vows, vala? Yeah. We have this thing called the military vow, where we vow to protect our country against any foreign foe at any price, basically. And like vala velvoittaa, as we say in Finnish. And what's happening in Ukraine is terrifying, and I would never hope for that to happen here in our home country. But if it comes to that,
not to say this in any kind of bragging way, but like I've said, that's exactly what we've trained for. If you look at the roads coming in eastward into Helsinki or whatever, defending those, all of that is all planned out, and just looking at what went down in Ukraine. Now, assuming that Russians could do some actual lessons learned, the thinking before,
which historically they can eventually.
Yeah.
Right.
After a lot of losses, but they can.
Right, eventually. But because the thought was, all right, there was Georgia, 2008, then there was Crimea, and now there's this. And the thinking was they've learned from that. Now, looking at what went on end of February, beginning of March, ever since, the lessons learned might be starting, might have started now, but there wasn't that in a large scale. Now, assuming that would happen, and, they would kind of be that worst case scenario, still, that's exactly what we've trained for. And now we're under NATO. We don't, looking at what happened between, or this whole, moving towards high speed, low drag kind of thing, that didn't happen in Finland. We don't live in a fairy tale where, things just kind of magically change. We train towards that, we gear towards that, and we're ready to defend ourselves. It'd be brutal, mostly for them.
Well said.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say that as a society, we are probably a lot more well prepared than most other societies for these kinds of situations. I mean, I've heard this quote some time ago that really speaks to me. I think it does describe the Finnish mentality quite well. It goes approximately something like, a society that makes a great distinction between its warrior and scholar will have its thinking done by cowards and fighting done by fools. And I think here we don't really do that. We are like warrior scholars, I would say, as a society, and we look at things very pragmatically and are realists in all the important ways, I would say. Yeah,
absolutely. And obviously we don't want a war here. Nobody wants that. You kind of, be prepared for that. And also, going back to that legend and our history, the fighting for Finland has always been done in Finland. There's not, or largely, there might be a historian who might maybe even disagree with me, but there's not a war, or a lot of, wars for Finland that could be fought on other shores.
That is a motivational difference, which you're seeing in Ukraine right now. Ukrainians are defending Ukraine. It might have started regionally, village or of Kiev or so, but I think one of the many changes that the war has brought is strengthened this idea of Ukrainians defending Ukraine, all of it, and the Russians are not.
Yeah,
frankly, irrespective of whatever propaganda, and that, of course, does make a difference. We have innumerable examples of this, not just from the thousands of years of history, but just the last decades, that it makes a difference if you're defending your home country. That certainly, I think, applies here. And I guess that may be a lead into the sense of talking about NATO, Finland, because we have this large group of people who are reservists. One of the questions I've gotten, more than anything, frankly, from the population at large is my son, daughter, girlfriend, wife, are they going to be sent to fight somewhere far away for a NATO ally? Now, Finland will come. That I have absolutely no doubt about. But your views, on this?
At least personally, I have always thought of it functioning pretty much the same way as we do with our peacekeeping or crisis management missions. I mean, those are mainly run by reservists. Like, of course, there is
voluntary.
Voluntary. Yeah. So there is like a part of that is what's it called, like kantahenkilökunta.
Cadre. Yeah,
cadre. Yeah, precisely.
But
part of
all
it is
volunteer
cadre,
units are sent abroad. Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking it's going to work exactly the same way. Nobody is sent against their will. It's all volunteer force. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and Finland will know when the defense plans are done what's expected. Or do they need to send a combat engineering battalion to Estonia?
Right.
Then you just ensure you've pre-recruited enough people that if it gets activated, you send all volunteers to Estonia and so on. But I guess that may be one difference when we're talking about this in terms of Finland coming in with Finland's national service reservist system versus then an all-volunteer force country joining NATO.
Yeah, and like just that process of like, it has to be that political decision that Finland will somehow be a part, and then have those volunteers. And the thing is that they're not a ready-made unit, so they come from all over the place, and then they get trained into being a coherent unit and are ready to be deployed. In Finland's case, not being the majority of a battalion, possibly a smaller entity of that, but yeah.
And of course, as we were talking earlier, Finland is likely to whatever situation contribute immense amounts of intelligence, air power, sea power within this region. So I think, but it just seemed like that's one of the things that citizens have been writing to me about is this very deep personal thing.
Right.
Of what will my role be, and will it change with NATO membership?
And that's the thing with like there is that certain large shift in thinking now.
A changing strategic culture in some ways. We're now, or not right now, but we will be a part of a collective defense family. And that does require some change. So patience is requested from all listeners who are already part of NATO countries. Yeah. We will learn, but it'll take a little while.
Yeah, exactly. And to add to that real quick, again, I'm cutting you off mid-question here. Sorry.
No worries.
But just the thought of, again, like a lot of our large parts of our defense forces are already fully integratable into NATO. In many cases, much more so than some NATO members.
I mean, we have.
I think it's just a switch of a button going. Ding, NATO.
There are probably some encryption stuff and things, and then there may be legit things that we've just done differently, but they've been such a closed off secret portion of defense planning that we haven't told anyone, and we'll find out there's bumps in the road. But absolutely, as you said, the Finnish fighter jet pilots, they use feet for height. Which obviously isn't for any other reason than to be interoperable. Just as one detailed, or the maps were changed. I think when I did my service, so like late 90s, the map coordinates and the map system was changed to the NATO logic. So there's a lot of detail work already done, even with Finland not being member.
Wait, they use feet actually?
Yeah, they do.
The more you know.
To anybody out there, switch over to the metric system. It'll make everybody's life easier. You were saying?
Yeah, I was saying one other very small, minuscule detail, but still, I think if I'm understanding it correctly, in NATO, the color for practice ordnance and stuff like that is blue, and the color for dangerous stuff is yellow. Whereas here in Finland, everything that is like practice material, from RPGs to basically anything, mines, stuff like that, all the practice material is yellow. So there's a lot of painting to be done.
Hell of a lot, just spray paint going around.
So yeah, I mean there'll be differences, but you're right. There's a lot of interoperability already there. There was an exercise, Bold Quest, 2019, I think.
Yeah,
and it was talked about as a technical test thing, but really what it showed is that you could have a French or Belgian or British JTAC or a ship targeting something, sending the targeting information to an American plane across Finnish networks or a Finnish MLRS, all digitally, not talking, giving coordinates, but all happening in fraction of a second. And that was then. So I can only imagine once Finland actually becomes a NATO member, and NATO can release more things to Finland, this will be even at a better level.
Varusteleka. Better gear for less.
Yeah, we were almost talking about the fact that we are currently, as of today, still doing the application process. And my question to you is, how do we go forwards from here? What are the next steps? When can we expect of being actually full-blown members of NATO?
Lots of steps. The very short version is hopefully by the NATO summit in Madrid, end of June, Finland and Sweden will be observer members, which means we can participate in all the meetings. We just don't have a right to vote. And Article 5 doesn't apply to us. And then by the end of this year, we'll be full members, is the kind of latest schedule. Now, what we don't know, of course, is because as we've seen in the last few days, this is also a time for the existing 30 members to have different views and opinions on, how quickly they want to see Finland and Sweden as members and what they want to get out of it.
Yeah, because it seems most of the countries we've gotten
security assurances. So not guarantees, assurances.
Right, from virtually every country or a lot of the countries.
Well, lots, and importantly, from the two nuclear-armed states in Europe, the U.S. just yesterday, I guess, all the Nordic countries, on and on. So a whole host of countries saying, if you threaten or you attack Finland or Sweden, we will be there. And they can do this bilaterally, of course. So if the thinking, again, being avoid war. If you're in Kremlin and you're sitting and thinking, well, this first war we started not going so well, but let us start a second one where we won't just meet the Finns, but the Americans, the French, the British, the Germans. I mean, I know they have a high risk profile, but that may be overdoing it for them, I think. So
right.
That's what I'm hoping, at least.
Right.
So so security assurances of you will not be alone even during the process. If you're a Liverpool fan, I guess, you never walk alone.
Absolutely. Speaking of the British, that's actually something that I've been, I've noticed that the British and Boris Johnson have been especially vocal about all of this. I feel like more vocal than normally. I don't know, as a researcher, have they? Because I feel like they may have realized the actual asset that we would be for NATO and for their defense.
It's because Liverpool is over there and you never walk alone.
True.
So for some international listeners might not realize this, there is a chunk of the Finnish population who are Liverpool fans going back decades.
Right here.
So I think from an international politics perspective, there's a few different things to explain this. One is when they left the EU, there's a great kind of story that wouldn't be told about. We might have left the EU. We haven't left Europe. in terms of defense or caring about Europe. So that's one aspect. And the Brits have this thing called JEF, or they lead something called JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is basically all the military capable forces in Northern Europe about. And they can then be used for expeditionary operations somewhere else, but also for the defense of the people who contribute to JEF. And then there's this kind of global Britain agenda. So I think there were many different reasons for the UK to want to show that they're an active part of Europe's security as a NATO member, in spite of kind of EU issues.
Right.
So I think this explains. But of course, during even the Cold War, Finland and the UK had as much as you could, a flourishing relationship in terms of acquisitions, some cooperation. There was an agreement already some years ago before this about deeper cooperation, which I know has led into all sorts of people and units visiting back and forth between Finland and the UK. So this is kind of a continuation from that. But certainly the language we heard in the last few weeks from the defense minister and then Prime Minister Johnson is very clear that they feel it's important enough for them to give such assurances because they really want Finland and Sweden to be able to join NATO.
All right. So explain to me this. Everybody else likes us. We like everybody within NATO, and beyond. Turkey is being problematic. They, according to news, they've even halted that process for Finland to join NATO.
Yeah, is it a realistic possibility that Finland will not be, and Sweden, that we won't be able to join NATO because of Turkey?
No, I think we will. It might not happen quite in the 2-3 days that we were hoping that we'd get the negotiations and the observer member status thing done. How do I see this? Well, I actually lived in Istanbul for some years, and I did visit the bazaar quite a number of times. So this is how I view it. It's about how you negotiate, and there are different negotiation cultures within NATO. That'll be something that Finland needs to get used to. I don't know, but looking at what Turkish officials, President Erdogan, has said, what they demand, what they don't, it seems like a good cop, bad cop, a massive list of things they want, from back into the F-35 program that Finland and Sweden should give people Turkey considers terrorists, just, extradite to Turkey, a whole long list of things. I think Turkey, President Erdogan, they want something. And a couple of weeks from now, they'll have something they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. That's, in a way, the reality of how the alliance works. But why am I so confident that we still be members? Turkey realizes that there's only so far you can push this without it really, really begin to hurt them. I mean, they want something, but it can't be so big and they can't be so troublesome that they really get the US and many European NATO members really angry at them.
All right, so there's nothing that they want that we or NATO couldn't give them that would actually...
Well, they probably are. I mean, they've, among other things, said they want the EU to lift the arms embargo, rule of law countries. Finland will not give just if Turkey says, here's a blanket list of people we think are terrorists, Finland's obviously going to say, well, evidence, guarantee that they will be treated correctly in prison, they'll get a reasonable trial, all this stuff. And which Finland would do in any other such case, just because legal requirements. So, no, I don't think Finland and Sweden, we won't sell our principles on this. But this is just a way of negotiating. Maximalist demands, and then you'll get something.
Yeah.
Can we just buy a few of those drones, the Bayraktars, and just make this disappear?
Hey, looking at their performance, against our kind of, I guess, only realistic adversary, I'll take some. Yes, I have no idea how well they work in Arctic conditions, or whether or not the sensors work well in our part of the woods. But Ukraine's not entirely different in terms of some of the landscape. So, yeah, if the deal is we get some more drones, sign me up. We'll find the money somewhere.
Which is
All
something
for it.
that the army is advancing. What was it? A couple of thousand more drones in its different forms.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely one lessons learned from what's going on in Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the
Reinforcing
argument was,
drones.
of course, for a while that, really advanced drones were really the purview of great powers. The U.S., they required satellite and other, massive infrastructure. Well, I don't think Ukraine has a massive satellite constellation or many other things. So clearly there's a middle road. And this is one of the things that the Finnish defense establishment generally has been good at, is these really high-end capabilities we talked about. Then you need to also outfit and kit the very large, reserve field army force, and then you buy other stuff. So it's a constant trade-off. There's no situation where the Finnish defense establishment is like, let's just buy the most perfect thing ever that looks good on PowerPoint, but we haven't seen work.
Right.
Yeah,
Now
I
we're
mean,
done kind of thing.
Exactly. It's, this clearly works against our potential adversary.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's,
we're literally seeing
purchase.
commercial drones with hand grenades and plastic cups work surprisingly well.
Yeah.
And I think there were a few enterprising reservists who drove over to the Polish-Ukrainian border with 50, 100 with drones, something like that. So there's but I can say the Finnish Defense Force have been looking at this for a while, and this is where, again, the varied skills of the reservists come up. There are a lot of really good people who know about drones and defense forces, but there are also a lot of civilians who are really good in different ways. And these have been combined in, I can say, imaginative ways already.
Yeah, and to come back to our society being rigged up for basically anything to come, that is one thing that we can draw from all walks of life. And when you have basically all military-aged males are reservists. I mean, you get a lot of capabilities from many different fields.
And certainly needs to be improved how reservists are used. NATO membership will be one of these questions. Where do you send 100, 200 officers from?
Yeah.
Because the cadre force doesn't have them. So do you use the recently retired? Do you say, okay, well, if we're talking about logistics, if someone's a logistician by day and a reserve officer, maybe you send them, because they actually know how to do this constantly, and they're on the cutting edge of logistics globally and so on. So that's just one other thing where, I think a further mixing of how cadre, reservists, retired people, and people who haven't done military service, but kind of, in a way, mid-career jump in and are taken in by the military because they have some exceptional skills in fields.
Right. I don't know if we kind of went through this already, but can NATO afford to not welcome us into their ranks? And I was listening to this German expert on this, and she said Finland and Sweden, somewhere along the lines, Finland and Sweden are the best countries that just are not a part of NATO yet, kind of thing.
I mean, as we're talking about, there's the geography component I mentioned, there's the straight up military capability, and the fact that with them as members, it'll make it easier for Poland, Germany, US, UK, everyone to live up to existing commitments to defend allies. So, I mean, I think that is the reason why NATO has been so vocal about the doors are open, welcome, we'll make sure the process is quick. Now we're seeing what NATO consensus decision-making means. The process is not quite as quick on the day as we were hoping. So, can they afford to? Well, I'm sure their defense plans were good as they were, but, we'll make NATO better and stronger and more, useful, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, that's a good point you're bringing up there regarding the consensus decision making, because that's also historically been one argument against joining NATO. The fact that there has been worries about if we join, then it's just going to be the US telling us what we're going to do, and we have to just put our hands up and comply. But as
Obviously,
as we're seeing now, that's exactly not the case.
And I mean, just look at even bigger things. 2003, Germany and France were never going to let it be a NATO operation. So yeah, this is how it works, and this is, for Finland's perspective, a big difference between being an EU member versus the NATO member, which is very clearly, the states are the main actors, as opposed to the EU has Commission, Parliament, and other competencies, so to speak.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that we are getting this point across in the way that we are right now.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that I've thought about a lot. Like, given our place in the world, was this not foreseeable that this might be what we need? And also, the thinking in Finland has been that we have this NATO option. When shit hits the fan, we can join NATO.
Press the button and be full-blown members.
Which is kind of seems like there's that saying of like, there's no use in calling the fire department, when your house is already burned down, kind of thing. It's a very dangerous way of thinking, that we can just do this now, and when things change, we'll do something different.
Yeah.
And I have to say that domestically, because there's been this option, and the population just changed its mind, said, we're looking at the situation now, we think is a good time. So I guess it's a lesson for us, but
All right. All right. I think we've covered pretty much everything. Am I right?
I'm thinking the same. We were talking about making a brief 30 to 45 minutes episode regarding us joining NATO, and
you know what you could call this? A special operation.
Yes, a quick special podcast.
That is longer
episode.
than we thought.
Yeah.
We remain master podcasters.
Yeah. For sure.
All right. You'll be hearing a lot more from Charly Salonius-Pasternak on any big news channel around the world, more or less.
Or Twitter.
And if you aren't already, check out Mighty Finland's podcast, Insta.
Yep.
And,
we're on Twitter. We're even on TikTok. We're making funny videos on TikTok every now and then.
I have seen those, yes. I am looking, but you know what? If you guys ask me to dance, then I can't do it because, it'll just be bad for you. Or it'll become a meme.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other
right.
option. Tens of millions of people will laugh at it.
Right. Is that a bad thing?
There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Exactly.
They say. Yeah.
All right. But yeah.
That's all for now.
That's all for now. Give us a follow. Let us know if you got any more questions. Slide into our DMs or whatever.
Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
I just have to say my dad is going to be super stoked that we got Liverpool pushed into the podcast, because he's an even bigger fan. But yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This podcast is produced together with Savox, Varusteleka, and Savotta. We trust their gear, and so should you.